me just quickly share my screen.
So while she's doing that, welcome to our Election Slam session on microadvocacy. I'm Vicki DeGroat, and Sandra Burkhead and I are going to be your facilitators. If you have questions, please just go ahead and drop those in the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on that. When we ask for feedback, or if you have something you want to contribute, you can electronically raise your hand, or if you don't know how to do that, wave your hand. We'll try to keep watching everybody to see if that's happening, and we'll call on you. We have 30 minutes, maybe a little bit less, and then we will all move back to the main room since this is the third session. So we're going to talk about microadvocacy. We're going to spend some time defining what microadvocacy is, talking about why it's important to the run-up to the November elections. We'll give you some tips and techniques for doing it, and then give you some time to work on your pitch and get some feedback. And we'll wrap things up with creating a plan for using what we've talked about in the next 8 weeks, 72 days, until we have this most critical election. So what is microadvocacy? We define microadvocacy as supporting a cause or policy on a small scale by talking to people we know. The idea behind microadvocacy is that we spread our messages to those we have relationships with to encourage them to get engaged and to vote for those candidates who will have a positive impact on the issues that we care about. So why is microadvocacy important? Lots of research shows that we are influenced by those we know and trust. A message coming from a friend or a family member is way more impactful than something you read or hear on TV, especially if that TV source or what you've read is kind of questionable. Campaigns know that face-to-face interactions are way better than at increasing voter turnout than material mailed out or TV and social media ads. And this year has not been a good time for those face-to-face things for candidates other than like this. Finally, talking with people we know is much less frightening than knocking on doors of people who are strangers, which we're not doing this year. So it's all the more important that we have these micro advocacy conversations.
So let's talk about how to do it. How do you micro advocate? We sent you some pre-work a few days ago explaining how to prepare. The first thing you're going to do is decide on the issue that is most important to you. So what is it that you're really invested in? Education, climate change, healthcare, affordable housing? What is it that you care most about? Once you've selected the issue, you got to create your pitch. You should be able to say it in 2 minutes or less. No lectures, just a quick, concise, clear pitch. When you're writing it, use those I statements like I'm concerned about, or I care about, or I've been researching. And add a personal story. Our stories really humanize us and make our positions much more relatable and understandable. Make a statement about how you came to your view. So what impacted you to make you think the way you do? And lastly, you need to do some homework about which races or candidates are going to impact the issue that you're working on. If you're interested in climate change, you may want to target something on a national level, like a Senate race. If it's education, you might be thinking about a school board or a state legislature. Try a couple of websites that will be sending you in resources, and Vicki's going to type them in the chat. Vote411.org or youcanvote.org are both great sources of information. Once your pitch is finished, you got to pick a time to use it. You don't want to do it in the middle of an argument or at a stressful time. Pick a calm time, like maybe you take a walk with a friend, or you are FaceTiming with a family member, just to make sure you can talk to those people who are going to be receptive to your opinion. Your crazy aunt that's on the other side politically is probably not your best choice. And lastly, if you start talking about it and you don't feel like your person is interested in hearing you, or it doesn't seem to be going well, just change the subject and try another time. Vicki's got a really good example of micro advocating that happened to her in the past, so she's going to share that with us now.
This was probably about 12 or 15 years ago. I'm not going to go into the whole background of my sister, but she used to be very liberal, then she kind of got very conservative. And about 12 or 15 years ago, she and I were on a road trip and we were talking in the car, and she started to go off on this thing about, not like angry, but just kind of about what she didn't understand why same-sex marriage was such a big deal. Like, why couldn't they just settle for commitment ceremonies? Why does it have to be a legal marriage? That's not, something that should be right. And so she kind of took a breath and I started talking. And I told her about how in the late 90s, we had moved, and my husband had some new coworkers, and found out that one of his new coworkers was going to be off, was hoping to be off for a while because his partner was dying from AIDS and was in hospice. And he, was hoping to be with him. So my husband gave him about 3 weeks of his vacation time so that he could spend time with his partner. And so, we felt good about that. We were doing something to help. And we find out later that that coworker had ended up spending most of that time off in court trying to see his partner because his partner's family would not allow him to be there with his husband, essentially, So, and he eventually did get to see him for a few days before he passed. And that was just like, what the heck, And so I told my sister, if they'd been able to be married, that would never have happened. So, so that's not the end of the story. But so about a couple years ago, my sister, I planted that seed in her head, right? She turned to me and she said, I never really thought about that before. I hadn't thought about those impacts on people's lives. And then about 10 years later, she got herself ordained online, and she married two women, two of her best friends who were women, and she performed that ceremony. So she came full circle. And I feel like I really planted that seed for her because she really just was not thinking about that kind of thing at all. So it wasn't necessarily about a candidate, but was an issue. And I think it did help her to start thinking different politically in other ways as well.
Thanks, Vicki. So you can really see how micro-advocating can have an impact on people who are close to you just when they begin to understand the issue and where you're coming from. So here's a pitch example I'm going to share with you. I've been really concerned about North Carolina not expanding Medicaid. I have a nephew with Crohn's disease. He's really struggled to get good treatment that would enable him to work full-time and take care of his family. If the legislature expanded Medicaid, it would be life-changing for him. I'm making sure to vote for candidates who support Medicaid expansion. So having said that, let's just take a moment and see if anybody has questions about how to create a pitch before we give you a chance to do it. Anybody? Okay, let's go ahead and move into our exercise. If you had a chance to work on the pre-work, you can use this time to refine the pitch that you started. If you haven't, you can write one. We're going to give you 4 minutes, and once that 4 minutes is up, we'll get some volunteers to read their pitches and we'll give feedback. So let's get started. We have about 30 seconds left. Okay. Who'd like to volunteer to share a pitch with us? Lois?
Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Mine is a lot bigger issue than you're talking about, so it might not be appropriate. But anyway, I'm concerned about the environment. And I think that COVID has shown us that we can improve air quality by just changing our behavior. And I've been thinking that we need national leadership to convince citizens to just do it and change our behavior to improve the environment. During COVID, we worried about not having enough toilet paper. But with climate change and global warming, we're going to have to worry about not having the infrastructure to withstand stronger hurricanes. We're going to have to worry about clean air, and we won't have respirators to help us breathe. And we're going to need to worry about clean water. We're drinking the same water the dinosaurs drank. There is no more, and we can't make any more. So I think that we have to change our behavior, and we have to have leadership to encourage or make us change our behavior.
Great, Lois. So what races will you be targeting in thinking about the environment?
You're muted again.
I haven't selected a race yet, but that's kind of been rumbling around in my head about mainly the national races, I think, because I think COVID was a national issue and we changed our national behavior, and the air quality did improve for a short time. I'm sure it's getting worse again, but we can do it if we put our minds to it.
So you're thinking about congressional races then for this particularly?
Yes. Yeah,
great.
Probably. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any feedback for Lois?
Well, I love the tying it back to, like, linking it so directly to COVID has been a horrible way to run an experiment on what happens to the environment, right? When we have pretty drastic behavioral changes, but also validation that the environment can be positively impacted through our actions.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think that's a really strong link.
Good pitch. So Pat, you've got your hand up.
Okay. Mine sounds longer, but I timed it and it comes in under 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. I've been moved to think about the term defund the police arising from the recent protests. What exactly does that mean? Or more to the point, what would that look like for me? Seeing American streets look like war zones with bayonets, night vision, sniper scopes, riot batons, helmets, weapons including grenade launchers and flashbang grenades, is a scene that I never expected to see in this country. Certainly not employed by fellow Americans paid with my tax dollars to protect me. This is insane and cannot continue. I intend to ensure that my Congressman David Price and Senators Burr and Cunningham pass legislation that will end all future transfer of military equipment to state and local law enforcement. Military equipment made for the battlefield has no place on our city streets. Tax dollars.
No, go ahead, Pat. Go ahead, finish up.
The tax dollars used to purchase, store, and maintain this equipment would be diverted to provide services that would reduce the need for police intervention, such as good paying jobs, affordable housing, equally funded education, and appropriate treatment for substance abuse and mental illness.
So here's what I really, really like about that, Pat. You're clear and specific about what portion of this issue you're really going to focus on, and that transfer of military equipment and what would happen to the money that had been used for that in a positive way made that pretty compelling. So I think that's great. Did you have any other personal experience other than just watching what's been happening that you would be able to add?
No, in fact, it probably would have been more if I had been out there, but I have not gone to any of these protests due to age.
I think it's effective, though, to just talk about what you've seen on TV or seen happening in this arena that brought you to the view. So really good job. Any other feedback for Pat?
I would say, even though you haven't been to any of these protests, to just even be able to say, I've been to protests and never in a million years is this something that I would have been afraid would happen. And now, like, even if I did feel like health-wise safe to go to a protest, I'd be terrified now, right? Or just something to link that you've been in these situations, you've been in these places.
I mean,
and
Laurel Mondays and HK on J, and I would never have expected any of this
right.
in those situations.
Right. That's great. That's great. Anybody else want to, Susan?
Unmute.
Yeah, my mouse was not behaving. I was just going to say, I have heard of cities that have successfully rebuilt their police force, like Camden, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So anything you can say about here's what does work,
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't have personal experience with it. So Camden was an extreme case. They actually did completely shut down their police force and start over and train people differently. I won't say better.
Mm-hmm.
But anything else you can find about, I've heard of, I know this city, got rid of the military equipment and did X, and they saw their crime rates drop by X. Any kind of data you can get, well, data doesn't always work with Trumpers, but any examples you can give of things that worked, I think help, and then make your point even stronger.
And in this particular, with microadvocacy, we're not talking about having the conversation with someone who is opposite from you. This is your neighbor, your colleague, your cousin, your friend. So it should be they should be a little more receptive.
Well, sort of on a related issue, I was at a webinar yesterday where they were talking about alternatives to having police respond to all calls, and mentioned that having police go with social workers can be dangerous. And I said, can you give me that citation? And they gave it to me, and I forwarded it to all the council members and to Chief Cassandra Deck Brown yesterday.
Nice. So one more example, Suzanne or Carrie?
So mine is homelessness is a big issue in Wake County, especially in Raleigh. With the economic impact of COVID pandemic, many more people are at risk of being unhoused because of no salary or jobs. Eviction may be a big issue. In Raleigh, there is a bond for voters to approve housing. Have you considered voting in favor of this bond, or do you have any questions about it? I've been working on this issue for a long time, and I may be able to fill you in on why it would be a good thing to do.
That was so good. I mean,
Well,
and I think
I've been working on this a long time, and it is a narrow issue. And that's one thing in Raleigh, that bond issue won't affect the rest of the county. So
Right.
we've had to refocus.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, City Council's not up for election this time.
But the bond is on the ballot.
the bond will be on the ballot, and that I love about what you said is that specifically, here's the bond, and I've got a lot of information about it. If you want to hear more, I'd be happy to talk to you. That is just a beautiful invitation for providing more data to somebody. Okay, I hate to do it, but these things go fast. I'm going to turn it back over to Vicki to finish us up.
Okay, so before we're done, we want to make sure that your plan is fully rounded out, and we want to take a minute for you to write down the names of 5 people that you plan to talk to before this election. They need to be people who are likely to listen to you, but they might be hesitant to vote, or they're having trouble figuring out how to vote. They might be disillusioned with politics and feel like, you know, their vote won't matter. They don't like any of the candidates or whatever. So those are the kind of people that you're wanting to talk to, people who you can actually kind of maybe move the bar on and not our polar opposites. So if you can think of 5 people, write them down, get them in your head, give you about, how much time do we have left? About a minute, maybe less, 30 seconds to get those 5 people together.
I think we can do a minute. I haven't seen the note saying we're finishing our breakout yet.
Are these supposed to be people that we don't think are already on board with us? Because everybody that I know pretty much thinks the same way I do.
Yeah, people who you think maybe could use a little nudge. They don't have to be somebody you're like super close with, but someone you know might be receptive to hear what you're saying, even if you don't know them that well. You get a good vibe off of them.
I found with the primary, because I am so active with the league, that a lot of people ask me how to find out whom to vote for, and I always refer them to vote 411 because it's the person's own opinion, unedited. And I said that's the way you can see what they really believe.
Right. I think it's probably been about a minute. I didn't really set the timer. But make sure that when you're going to talk to these people that you're thinking of, that you have that personal story ready, personal examples of things you've witnessed, experienced yourself, or someone else has. And then watch for those right moments that don't be afraid to speak up. It might come at an unexpected moment that you realize, oh, here's my opportunity. And now that you've prepared, you can segue into doing that. We have a couple minutes left that we can take some questions. So raise your hand or dive right in.
Suzanne, you posted something in the chat that I thought was great. If you want to share that with the group in case people didn't read it.
I just feel like getting people out to the polls is the most important. So every single person that I come in contact, and I'm not out much, but I am out working on, Zoom or whatever, I ask them if they're registered to vote or if they've moved, and to make sure. And then I always ask them to send an absentee ballot if they aren't opposed to that. And then getting out the vote is the biggest issue. And like I said, I recommend vote 411 because that way you don't have to take a side. You can say the candidate has agreed to post what their opinion is. It's unedited, and there you can see for yourself what they really believe, and then they can get it.
Thanks, Suzanne.
But I just spoke to somebody on Twitter, and he was whining about something. I said, "Are you registered? Are you sure?" And he was not registered. He didn't realize that he moved. So he wrote me back, and I said, "Yay, good."
I have a friend that every store she leaves, every store clerk she talks to, she says, "Have you checked your voter registration? Do you know you have a voting plan?" While they're checking her stuff through, because there's not that many opportunities, to go to parties or anything like that. So every possible opportunity to see if you can seize on it.
When you're in line at the grocery store. So any last questions before we go back to the main session for our wrap up?
No, this was great.
I always, it's always an uncomfortable place because you never know when you're going to get whooshed away.
You want to share about what Michelle said?
Yes.
Real quick.
I'll do that.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So remember what well, first of all, you know you can have a positive impact on who turns out to vote and how they vote by micro-advocating. Remember what Michelle Obama told us. It was only 2 votes per precinct on average in Michigan that determined the 2016 election outcome in that state. Don't leave the Zoom. We've got more great information to come.
Anybody want to share who some of their 5 people are? Maybe not specific, but generally who you're thinking you're going to talk to?
So I'm in a couple, it's less specific, but then I'm in a couple of lunch groups, like long-term lunch groups. And I plan to bring up my issues, and we have a very open relationship, but I plan to bring it up in both of my bring up my issues in both of my lunch groups. From the perspective of, here's what I care about. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good idea.
Well, late in September, I'm planning to have 3 other women that we get together 2 or 3 times a year for years over to socially distance on my back deck. And one of them is the only Republican that I know. She was my college roommate.
Oh, you know more than that, Pat.
Not that she's a Tea Party when she tells me she is. I live in a progressive white liberal silo.
I'm kind of there as well, but there's a few people I can specifically get.